Can you smell it in the air? Yeah, that's the smell of spring camp. Okay. Being a little bit facetious because it's only February, but BYU football starts spring camp all the same, and the climb towards glory in 2025 begins today.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And as always, thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk all things BYU spring ball. What do I expect out of the month-long camp to come for BYU? Who are breakout stars? Who is the guy that I lovingly call our spring ball MVP, who you likely will never hear from again? We'll get into all that and more as we roll on, but I want to start big picture on today's show and talk about BYU football. Obviously, coming off an 11-2 season, the BYU football program has a lot of expectations awaiting it in 2025. That's just zero doubt about it. They're going to be one of, at the very worst, top 4 teams in the preseason Big 12 poll. There's a shout that they could be the preseason favorite to win the Big 12 conference. They got a bunch of returning production, over 60%, a lot more of it coming back on the offense than the defense after you saw essentially the top of the defensive line, the top 4 contributors by and large exit the program. But there is still a lot of returning production and a lot of talent to add to that coming back for BYU. There is going to be a lot for the Cougars to prove this year. How do you improve on 11-2? Well, you go out and win the Big 12 title. You make the Big 12 title game. Heck, you get into the college football playoff and swing for the fences in terms of challenging for a national title. That is the type of stuff that BYU has to do to one-up what happened a season ago. So, what is this spring camp going to entail for BYU to accomplish that in 6-ish months' time? Well, the climb towards glory, as I mentioned in the open, starts today. These players, they have been spending the last about 8 weeks, give or take, really engaged in training their bodies. Weights, all kinds of speed training. We're talking all the physical traits that the coaching staff and more importantly, the strength and conditioning staff led by Ryan Phillips, they have been relentless in training these BYU players to get their bodies into peak physical condition. I can look back at last season and say that BYU had a fairly injury-free season, and that was a big reason why they accomplished what they accomplished, and I think you can directly tie that back to the training that Ryan Phillips has put these BYU players through. BYU has made an emphasis on making sure guys are as healthy as possible and remain as healthy as possible because, I say often on this podcast, the best ability is availability. And that's one thing that's been a critical thing for the success that BYU's had of late. So today, speaking of BYU's first practice, there are 15 of them scattered over the next month leading up to BYU's alumni game in late March. And the biggest thing that these BYU players need to understand is every one of these practices need to be taken seriously. Now, spring camp is a time for trial and error. You will see, and we obviously as a media corps will be out there for short windows of observation. We will be reporting on guys trying new positions and new looks about how BYU goes about their business, both offensively and defensively. Understand that the trial and error period for a college program is this period. They may try new formations, try out guys in new positions. Heck, they may even look at some different gadget type plays that will get obviously run. And if they work, they may be added into BYU's playbook. If they don't, essentially they're wadded up and tossed into the trash bin and you never hear from them ever again. This is going to be an interesting camp, but there is still a lot of development that BYU needs and needs to utilize this time effectively, like I said, to get over the top and ensure that they can surpass the expectations that I'm sure myself and any of you listening and or watching this podcast have for them this coming season. It's not easy to exceed what BYU accomplished last year. Just year 2 in the Big 12 in the Power 4 ranks, BYU had double-digit wins, capped off the season with an absolute demolition of a highly thought-of Colorado squad. So there is going to be a lot of people expecting a high-flying BYU Cougars squad to hit the ground running come September. But It starts now. If BYU wants to do what they believe they can do, and that is to win the Big 12 title, to play in the college football playoff, they were oh so close. It was practically on the tip of their tongue in terms of playing for all those different marbles last year. I can assure you, players, coaches, administrators, anybody affiliated with the BYU football program, they know how agonizingly close it was. And the margins, they're super razor thin that'll keep you out of those events versus what gets you in. Can you get over the hump this year? That's going to be the major prevailing talking point through this spring camp, throughout the summer, throughout training camp, and obviously on in to the regular season. But I'm looking forward to this. Kalani Sitake, I'll always give him his credit. He is a guy who is never going to go out there and put undue pressure on his players. He knows there's pressure. He is going to acknowledge it for what it is, and he's going to tell his guys in those meeting rooms, understand that what you guys have, the expectations you guys have heaped upon you, they are a privilege. They are because you guys did something special last year. Now, can you make those few tweaks, make the one or two plays that could turn this into what BYU hopes it is? And that's a magical run towards the postseason and a potential chance to play for a national championship. Remember, looking back, excuse me, still dealing with a little bit of a head cold here. But remember, last season, BYU had a crazy punt, a quick kick punt from Jalen Daniels go off the helmet of Evan Johnson that got recovered by Kansas, and they punched that in for a touchdown. And had that not happened, BYU very well may have escaped that Kansas game. And even had they not played as well as they did in the comeback attempt against Arizona State and that missed opportunity, JoJo Phillips streaking up the sideline and Jake Retzlaff unable to connect with him on a wide open, what appeared to be a wide open touchdown pass. We're talking 1, 2, 3 plays, and BYU's entire 2024 season may have gone to even higher heights. But that shows you it's that close. Those margins are so razor thin, and one practice in the spring may not seem coincidental and may not seem like something that can hurt or help BYU, but the players understand what they're going after, and they have to make sure that they are absolutely going for it, gunning for it, doing everything within their power, controlling the controllables, to use that adjective. All of those things are there. They're on the table. They're all attainable for BYU. Now, can these players take the next step? As I mentioned, they've spent the last 8 weeks training their bodies. Now they get out on the field and start to work on their actual in-game skills in terms of, for a guy like Jake Retzlaff, Aaron Roderick has said it. He wants to see 70% completion percentage. He was 58% last year. He wants to see 30 passing touchdowns. He had 20 a season ago. Well, Jake's got a lot to prove, and Aaron Roderick told Jay Drew, and he's made it very clear to many of us out there in the media in his rounds he's made. He was on the KSL Sports Zone on the show I produce, and said that we are going to make Jake work and prove it in spring camp. There's no resting on the laurels of an 11-2 campaign for Jake, and he is just one of 100+ guys who have everything to prove in this spring camp. Yes, his job is fairly safe. He's got 2 guys battling for backup reps behind him in McKay Hillstead and Trayson Bourget, but he still has to go out there and show that he's willing to put in the work so that he can take that next step and hopefully help BYU as a whole take that next step and achieve what they ultimately want to achieve. So who are the players, handful of them, 5, 6 guys, who I will most be interested in watching this spring, kind of my early players to watch? We'll dig into those momentarily as you roll on right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Roy. Roy is here for you guys to have some fun in the NIL space. It is the future of college sports, and it's transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table, and fans did not have a clear way to directly support the athletes they love, in this case of BYU. Now with Roy, you get to be part of the action and support BYU athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, individual players, think about that, decide how much you want to contribute to those players, and receive exclusive content from the athletes that you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control, no more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports all with your financial contributions. Download the Rory app now from the App Store and start backing BYU athletes in the way that they deserve, with transparency, trust, and most importantly, a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Rory and supporting your favorite players today. Get the Rory app wherever you get your apps in the App Store. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope y'all are doing well on this Thursday. I am excited to be out at the SAB, the Student Athlete Building in Provo, Utah this afternoon to watch BYU football practice. I know it's a snapshot. I know they'll be in helmets. There's not going to be a ton to take away, but it's just good to be back out there watching football. I am a junkie for football, as many of you probably are well aware if you're a long-time everydayer on this podcast, but it'll be good to be back out there. We'll obviously have a full report for you guys tomorrow. If you want the inside scoop on everything I'm seeing and hearing at BYU, well, join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group because they're going to be getting the updates literally moments after that practice wraps up. I'll be texting out my thoughts, and you'll get them instantaneously. Link is in the show notes below. The best part is 14-day free trial. You can get almost half of spring camp for free before just paying $5 a month to get that inside scoop. So join us today on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right. Players to watch in spring camp for BYU. It's always an interesting thing when it comes to spring camp because, as I mentioned earlier on in today's show, I lovingly call there's a player or two, it's usually one, maybe two guys, who end up being what I like to call the spring ball MVP, who you never hear from again. What do I mean by that? Well, they seem to be a walk-on, a down the depth chart guy that is a gritty performer, and they go out and have a really impactful spring. And I admit our 20-minute windows of watching practice are a snapshot of what usually is an hour and a half to 2 hours of work for the BYU football program. But those spring ball MVPs, for whatever reason, they seem to emerge. They become a storyline in spring camp. But by the time we get to training camp in August, they're either off the roster or literally they're buried on the depth chart and you never hear from them. I don't mean that to be a negative. That's what will happen this spring. Who do I think it'll be? I couldn't even begin to guess because there have been so many of them over the years. I don't remember half the names, but inevitably, there will be one or two guys. Just be aware. You're going to have to learn the name of a guy, and then you're going to feel like 3 months down the line, hey, whatever happened to so-and-so? It's going to happen. Now, actual players who I think you'll want to watch and monitor during spring camp, guys that I will be watching very closely. Let's start off with two guys who are transfer portal additions, and obviously they're going to be easy ones to keep an eye on because they're expected to have a major impact. Number one, Keanu Tanuvasa. How does he look at defensive tackle? He is part of a revamped BYU defensive line, but he has the talent to upgrade that defensive tackle spot for BYU and really make it into a formidable force. Excuse me. What does he look like out there on the field for the first time in BYU blue? I'll be keeping an eye on that. On the opposite side of the football, a former Utah teammate of his is Carson Ryan. Obviously, BYU has a dearth of returning production at tight end. Well, Carson Ryan's been playing college football for quite a while now. He has one season to get it right as a BYU Cougar. Can he really emerge this spring and put his stamp on saying, this is my position? There are other guys on the roster. Noah Moiaki. I look at Anthony Olson, a guy like Ethan Erickson, even some incoming freshmen like Tucker Kelleher. They're all going to have opportunities to obviously make their own imprint, but I think it's Carson Ryan's story to write when it comes to that tight end group. And we'll see what happens there. It's going to be interesting to see if he can really emerge or if it's going to be by committee in terms of the tight end position once again. Another name to keep an eye on, Hunter Clegg. Now, Hunter is a return missionary, so I'm not going to put a lot of undue pressure on him, but this was a kid who was an absolute star at the high school level and was absolutely a sensation and really has a lot to live up to now as he comes in as a defensive end for BYU. How much will he actually show in spring? Will he even see the field in spring? That's one thing to monitor because BYU is very careful with return missionaries and making sure that they don't push them too early. There are certain guys who come back from missions and they seem to be in peak physical condition and can step right in. Other guys, it takes some time to get back into the swing of things. So keep an eye on Hunter Clegg, but I'm also not going to be expecting too much from him in terms of what he really can produce. I'm also looking forward to seeing what some of these new freshmen coming in can do. Think of guys like Ethan Thomason, former 4-star offensive lineman, had a couple of injuries while he was out in the mission field. What does he look like as he comes in for his first spring camp? LaMason Waller. We've talked with him on this podcast a couple of times before he enrolled at BYU. This is his first chance to make an impression on the field for the Cougars. Kel Breslin, who we had on the show as well back in February, actually back in December, ahead of the national early signing window. Those are two guys who are true freshmen who are they literally graduated in December from high school. What can they show in their first spring camp? Are they up to the task of really emerging? I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do out there on the field, because I think that they have an opportunity to make an impression and hopefully find themselves on the depth chart going into the summer. I don't expect them to be at the top of the depth chart because, quite frankly, if they are, BYU's got bigger problems brewing. That means a bunch of injuries occurred, or simply guys have not lived up to expectations at both the wide receiver and running back positions in the case of Waller and Breslin. But they've got established veterans in front of them. But can they come in and show something, whether it's as a third stringer, getting an opportunity to maybe run with the ones once in a while? Can they just show some tidbits of being, hey, we're a guy they're going to want to monitor down the line here? That's the biggest thing. Other players to watch. I'll be monitoring the backup quarterback battle. Now, why would I be monitoring that so closely? Well, I think it's easy to say that they are the heir apparent to Jake Retzloff as Jake enters what is expected to be his final year of eligibility as a BYU Cougar. But can McKay Hillstead separate himself from Trayson Bourget, or vice versa? Aaron Roderick said it to Jay Drew that they have 3 quarterbacks in spring ball. It's just part of the deal with regards to this house settlement. It's going to cut down the rosters. BYU will carry 4 quarterbacks going forward. Maybe in a rare case, they'll carry a 5th. But in spring, it's Jake Retzloff, it's McKay Hillstead, and Trayson Bourget. You're going to have an interesting dichotomy there with just 3 guys taking all of the reps at quarterback. Obviously, it gives them an extra opportunity because, was it 8? Might have been 9 guys a year ago in spring camp, and there simply just wasn't room or reps to get guys looks at the quarterback spot. With just 3 guys in the room right now, that is going to obviously add extra reps to the plate of all 3 of these players. And I do wonder if the pecking order coming out of spring is established that it's Jake Retzloff, and then who's number 2, Hillstead or Bourget? And that storyline, it'll be one worth watching because, as I mentioned, if they establish themselves as the number 2 guy, well, they're the odds-on favorite going into 2026 as the incumbent, being the backup quarterback, to take over as starting quarterback to replace Jake Retzloff. So it's an important spring camp for those 2 players, speaking of Bourget and Hillstead, to show what they're capable of. Let Aaron Roderick have a thought in his mind, hey, that's a guy to file away for the future in terms of a guy that can come in and be what we want at the quarterback spot after Jake leaves? Or are they going to show not enough that may have Aaron Roderick thinking, maybe the transfer portal this upcoming season is something we're going to monitor a little closer when it comes to the quarterback spot? Defensively, also, one other name to keep an eye on. I'm looking forward to seeing what BYU has in the secondary. Most notably is Maury Bamba. Is he going to be everything that we're expecting him to be now that he's back officially for his extra year? It is still pending regarding Darius Lassiter. There's no word on if and when a judgment will come from the NCAA on his eligibility status, but Maury Bamba is back for another year. Can he take what he did at the back half of last season, and especially in that bowl game against Colorado, and translate it into consistent production? Him and Evan Johnson appear to be the odds-on favorites, at least early on, to be the starting corners for BYU. But do not be surprised if a guy like Trey Alexander, Jonathan Cabella, Marcus McKenzie, they're all going to be chomping at the bit saying, hey, they may be vets, but I'm going to supplant them and take over as the starting corner. I think the safety spots, you've got 2 very capable veterans in a guy like Raider DeMooney alongside Tanner Wall. But similar to what I just talked about with the corners, keep an eye on the young bucks, Falatau Satuala and Tommy Process. They're obviously going to want to push those 2 out of those jobs and take them over for their own. The linebacking core, very well established. Harrison Taggart, Isaiah Glasker, and Jack Kelly, wrap them in bubble wrap. Keep them healthy until September and then turn them loose. They have nothing more in my mind to prove than they've already proven. So I gave you just a laundry list of different guys that I'll be monitoring, but I guess the 5 in particular, I guess if you want me to narrow it down to 5, Keanu Tanuvasa, Carson Ryan, number 3, I'm going to make it 6. Trayson Bourget, McKay Hillstead, and that's in no order there. I think those 2 are worth monitoring. Then on the defensive side of the football, it's Maury Bamba, and then number 6, Hunter Clegg. Those will be the 6 in particular I'll be looking at. But as I said, there will be a name or two that will emerge, and they will be a storyline all spring camp long. And then for whatever reason, they will disappear into the annals of BYU football history and be quickly forgotten by everybody who talked about them for this month-long period. All right, final thoughts on spring camp. What else does BYU need to get out of this camp? Also, what are some superlatives that I've got for BYU over the next month that I'm going to obviously be monitoring as well? We'll delve into that momentarily as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends, a new friend over in Fabric. All right, so life moves fast, especially when you have a family. Obviously, I've got 3 kids. One day you're watching your kids take the first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. And I can tell you, time is flying with my own kids. That's why securing their future is so important, and Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family needs. All it is, with Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You'll be covered in 10 minutes. In many cases, no health exam is required. Obviously, we all want that peace of mind. I want to make sure my family is taken care of no matter what might come. And the best part is Fabric gives you that peace of mind. Join the thousands of other parents who trust Fabric to protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. And as always, there's a disclaimer here. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states, and price is subject to underwriting and health questions. But once again, you can get started today and take care of your family right now with term life insurance by going to meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope y'all are doing well on this Thursday. All right, we have talked a lot about the big picture stuff for BYU football when it comes to spring camp, what it's going to set them up to do hopefully down the line. We've also talked about what players we're going to I myself, I'll be keeping an eye on for the BYU football program. What else is there to take away from spring camp? Well, to be honest, the biggest thing for me is how quickly this team gels. I guess the superlative is getting on the same page. BYU 2 years ago, remember in 2023, they brought in, it was like 60 some odd newcomers. They turned over more than half the roster, and it took them forever. And I don't know if they really ever fully gelled that season, on their way to a very disappointing 5-7 season. Well, last year, BYU bet on continuity, added some strategic stuff in terms of transfer portal and the like, and it benefited them to the tune of going 11-2 last year. They have hit the transfer portal a little bit once again this year. They've got a lot of production, as I mentioned, coming back, more than 60% of their production last year, which is, I think, in the top third of the country, if I recall what Bill Connolly wrote for ESPN. But the thing is, how quickly will this group come together? Will the senior leaders emerge? You got guys like a Tanner Wall who are expected to emerge. Connor Pace said it himself. He thinks he could be a really, really solid voice, because you lose veteran voices like Connor Pace, like Tyler Batty. Other guys have to step into that void and lead out. I think Keanu Tanavasa, as new as he is for BYU football, will absolutely step into a leadership role. He has got leadership qualities. I've seen him while he was at Utah. I've had brief interactions with him during his time as a Ute. And that kid, he has got leadership written all over him. I could very easily see him come training camp being voted as a team captain for the BYU football program. I think Tanner Wall, same type of a deal on the defensive side of the football. Those are two guys who I don't think are afraid to speak up and lead the way. On offense, Jake Retzloff, he has got to become that field general in every sense of the word, and that is to be the guy who's pushing everybody. Bark at guys when they need to be barked at. Praise them when they need to be praised. He has to step forward and be a vocal leader. He's done a pretty good job at it so far, I feel like, at BYU, but now it's got to be bumped up to another level for him, if not multiple levels. He has to lead. He's got to lead by example. He's got to lead with his voice, and he's got to be kind of that focal point for this BYU offense. I also look at other guys, Chase Roberts, who I think is going to step into that void a little bit more and be a little more vocal. He's admitted he's more of a lead by example guy. You got to get past that sometimes as a leader. You have to open your mouth and call guys out when they need it. We had Connor Pace on this podcast, and I'll tease this ahead. I'm supposed to have him on the show next week, so get ready for another edition of the Connor Pace show coming up next week. But Connor talked about the fact that there are times that you need to bark at guys. There's other times you do it on the field. There's times you do it in private. You have to know who your teammates are and the way they respond to different circumstances. Some guys, they don't respond well when being called out in public in front of their peers. Then you take them aside in a quiet moment and say, hey, here's what I'm looking for from you. That's what guys like Chase Roberts, as I said, Jake Retzloff, Tanner Wall, Keanu Tanavasa, they've all got to do that. I also think a guy like Harrison Taggart, he has got a pretty vocal voice in that linebacker spot, especially wearing the green dot, the communication device in his helmet. He needs to be a voice as well that can lead BYU more than just calling out the plays on the field that Jay Hill is relaying to him. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those guys do as leaders, but they've got to get this team on the same page. Newcomers have to mix with old heads, to use that expression. They have to have guys who are true freshmen, who are 17 and 18 years old, mixing with return missionaries who may be married, who may have kids, who are 24 and 25 years old. BYU's roster is a pretty vast dichotomy of race, of background, of what your circumstances are, whether you've served a mission, whether you're not even a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, no matter what it is, there is a really, really interesting mix, and you have to get that all on the same page. And it's going to be critical they take advantage of the spring period to get on that same page as much as humanly possible. Yes, there is a transfer portal window that opens after spring camp. That will be something to monitor, but take advantage of this month-long camp and get as many guys, if not all of them, on the same page. I will also add this. That story from the Salt Lake Tribune, and I've already addressed it in what I believe the holes in it to be, and they are pretty large. I punched some pretty big holes in it myself on our edition on Tuesday, if you want to go check that out if you missed it. But that story, I think, could cause some guys, whether it's intentional or not, to consider what their future is at BYU if in their mind, the NIL figures or the future of revenue sharing, which goes into effect this summer, pending that House settlement being agreed to. If those numbers don't add up in these players' minds and they feel like they're, in their eyes, being hosed or screwed over by BYU, that could be an issue that BYU has to get past. And that goes back to these leaders. They have to talk with these guys and let them know, hey, there's a bigger picture at play here. We have got a very, very we've got a very, very good team based on potential and a lot of things that could go right for us this season. And we don't need selfish attitudes in this locker room. You have to get past that. You have to let the numbers go. If you're in it just for the money, it's not going to cut it. And I'm not talking just about BYU. If a player is in college football these days just to make money, great. There are programs you can go make money, but you'll also lose football games. You'll lose a lot of them because of those attitudes that they're a cancer to a football program. They get into a program and they will absolutely tear it up from the inside out. They got to be able to avoid that. And I'm interested to see how BYU navigates all that. Once again, with NIL, with the future revenue share that's going to come into effect, as I said, coming up in July. There's a lot of money on the table. Can it be something that BYU, speaking of Kalani Sitake, his team leaders, etc., can they get these guys past being so focused on the bottom line and understand that there's a whole lot more to play for as a member of the BYU football program? It's a major question mark to watch in the aftermath of that piece from the Salt Lake Tribune. All right, so there you go. Almost 30 minutes of my brain dump for you guys of what I've been thinking about spring ball over the past 2 weeks leading up to it. But looking forward to being out there on the field once again in Provo this afternoon. Full recap coming up tomorrow. But if you want the up-to-the-minute latest stuff, join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. The link is in the show notes below, whether you're watching and or listening to this. Once again, you can sign up in mere seconds and get a 14-day free trial to get the inside scoop on all things BYU that I'm seeing out there on the field this afternoon. But as always, thank you for your guys' support of the podcast. Thank you for being with us here every single day, as we like to call you, our everydayers on the Locked On Cougars podcast.